Hilchos Maachalos Asuros Perek Shloisha Asar, the laws of forbidden foods, chapter 13. We continue today the topic of Yayin Nesach, wine of a Gentile that's forbidden because of suspicion that it's related to idol worship. And today, the main discussion is covering laws where Jews and non-Jews interact, either in terms of sharing property or in terms of sharing the wine or other similar cases where the situation could affect the status of the wine as converting from Jewish wine to non-Jewish wine, in which case it's forbidden. And those are the cases that the Rambam is going to primarily rule on today. So we begin halacha aleph. Halekeach bayis or shesachar bayis. A Jew buys or rents a home b'chatzera shel ovet kechavim, in a courtyard belonging to an idol-worshipping Gentile. Umil'ohu yayin, and he fills up this house, this little home, with wine. Im haya hayisraeli darba isachatzer, if the Jew, besides for the home that he's using for his wine storehouse, he also lives in that courtyard in a different home, afal pisha ha-pesach pasuach. So then, even if the door to the storehouse with the wine is open, hayayin mutter, all the wine remains permitted, mipnei sheha'ovet kechavim mefached tamid, because the idol-worshipping Gentile is constantly scared. V'omer, and he's always saying to himself, ata yikonis lebeisoi pisayim, if I go into the storehouse and start dealing with the wine, any second, the Jew is going to come into his home suddenly, v'yimtza isi b'soich beisai, and find me in his home. But if the Jew himself was living in a different courtyard, it was only this little room that he was using as a storehouse for wine, but he didn't live there, the Jew cannot leave the courtyard until he closes the door to that little home. And the key and the seal, which is like an additional lock, should both be in the Jew's hand. In this case, there's no need to worry that the idol-worshipping Gentile is going to make forge a copy of the key and make his way in. As long as he locked it, he took enough precaution. Halacha beis, if the Jew left the courtyard without closing the door, in the case where he doesn't live in the courtyard, or he closed the door, but he left the key not in his own hands, but in the non-Jew's hands, all the wine is forbidden to drink. Perhaps the Gentile came in and made the wine into a libation, because the Jew isn't there. If the Jew merely told the guy, here, hold on to the key till I return, in this case, all the wine is permitted. By handing over the key, you haven't entrusted him with guarding the home, you've simply entrusted him with guarding the key. He doesn't feel like he has a right to enter the actual premises, and therefore it's not going to lead to any disqualification of the wine. Halacha gimel, ovet kechavim shesachar Yisrael lidroich leyenei betahara. An idol-worshipping Gentile approaches a Jew and he says, listen, I know you guys have very strict rules about your wine, who you can buy from and what you can buy. And I know that if you follow a certain procedure where I'm not involved in touching the wine, it's going to be permitted, it's going to be pure, and Jews will be able to buy from me. I want to make some money. So can you help me in preparing the wine that it's done fully according to Jewish supervision? So again, ovet kechavim shesachar Yisrael, an idol-worshipping Gentile hires a Jew, lidroich leyenei betahara, to press his wine for him in a state of purity, not ritual purity. Purity meaning purity relative to wine, that it shouldn't be considered disqualified non-Jewish wine. So that it should be permitted to Jews, and they'll buy from him. They did the procedure, but the wine was in the home of the Gentile. So, kind of like the case that we had just before, where it's the Jew's own wine. If the Jew who's guarding the wine lives in the same courtyard where the wine is, hayayin mutter, all the wine is permitted, v'afal pisha pesach pasuach v'hashemer nichnas v'yetze, even if the door to the storehouse with the wine is open and the guard is not there the entire time he's coming in and going out. Because since he lives there, he can always be there any second. No, the Gentile's not going to take authority into his own hands to disqualify the wine. But if the Jew who's guarding the wine is living in a different courtyard and he leaves the door open over there, hayayin asur, the wine is going to be forbidden. Here, not only if he left the door open, I misspoke before, even if he closed it and even if he locked it and he's holding on to the key and the lock, it doesn't matter. Because here, it's not the Jew's wine. Here it's the Gentile's wine. What's the worst that could happen for the non-Jew? Shekevan shehayayin shel eved kechavim ubirshusay, since the wine both belongs to the Gentile and it's in his possession, einay mefached lazayef ulihikanis labayis. In this case, he's not worried to forge the key and to go into the home. V'yoymar v'yihima, he'll say to himself, no, what's going to be? Im yedu bay lo yikchu mimeni. If the Jews find out, maximum, they're not going to buy from me. Not going to lose my wine. My wine's good. It's just going to become only fitting for Gentiles. So he has no reason, in the end of the day, to be scared and to go in and handle the wine. So therefore, if this Jew wants to enter into this partnership with the non-Jew, he must live in the courtyard where the wine is. Even if in this case, where the Gentile hired the Jew to make the kosher process for the wine is processed, and the non-Jew, the owner of the wine, writes a receipt to a Jew that he already received the money with which he's going to sell him the wine. So you would think now there's a deep commitment here. He already committed to this Jew that he's going to sell him all the wine. Since the Jew, the buyer, is not going to be able to remove the wine from the non-Jew's possession until he actually gives the cash, in the meantime, it belongs to the idol-worshipping Gentile, the Asur, and therefore it goes under the rubric of Gentile-owned wine, which is forbidden. Unless the Jew who's supervising the wine, again, lives in the courtyard. The point is that if he doesn't live in the courtyard, it doesn't matter what steps the non-Jew took in initiating a process of sale, as long as it's actually his legally, he's always, in his own mind, within the authority to disqualify the wine. However, the guardian, the Jew who's supervising, doesn't need to sit there constantly the whole day and guard the wine. He's allowed to enter and exit at will, as we explained. So long as he doesn't leave for an extended period of time, he could always come back in. Whether the wine is in the possession of the actual owner of the wine, whether it's in the different Gentiles' possession. The point is, as long as it's in the domain of a Gentile, the Jew must live there in order for the wine to be kosher. So if not, problems. Halacha hey haya yayin zeh hatohir shalayvit kechavim munach birshus harabim. What if this pure wine, in other words, this wine that was processed in a kosher way, that belongs to a Gentile, is sitting in the public domain, or in a home that opens directly into the public domain, and there's Jews that are constantly passing by, mutter, the wine is permitted. This wine is not considered to be in the domain of the Gentile. Okay, here's what I found, a couple of barrels of wine being rolled in the streets. Of course, the case would be where they're actually sitting in the streets. Halacha vav, the ashpa, the chalein, v'dekel, a garbage heap, a window, a palm tree. If the wine is situated in any of these locations, afal pishein by peiros, even if the palm tree has no fruit growing on it, these areas are considered like a public domain with regard to these laws, and just leaving the wine there is allowed. The chavis yayin sham, if there's a barrel of wine there and a Gentile right nearby, the fact that the Gentile is there doesn't forbid the wine. Because he'll think there's always people watching, he doesn't take the authority into his own hands. When a home opens directly into a public garbage heap or to a palm tree, that's like it's open directly to a public domain, and again the wine there is permitted. If a courtyard is divided by low barriers, so there's a clear division as to the two parts to this courtyard, but it's not a proper wall or a proper partition. A non-Jew, a Gentile, lives on the one side, the Jew lives on the other side. There's a demarcation, but not a heavy mechitza. Or if you have two roofs, where the roof belonging to the Jew is above, higher level, the roof belonging to the idol-worshiping Gentiles in the lower level. Or there were equal level roofs, but there was some kind of demarcation, low barriers between the roofs. Even if the hand of the idol-worshiping Gentile, had he wanted, could extend into the property of the Jew, the Jew need not worry about libation wine. If he left a barrel of wine on his side of the courtyard, he doesn't have to worry that the non-Jew touched it, nor with regard to any other matters of ritual purity. If he left food there, let's say, you don't have to worry that the Gentile touched it. because the demarcation is clear. Halacha ches mutar li Yisrael lahafkid yeinoi bikli sasun biyadei v'tkechavim. A Jew is allowed to deposit his wine in a closed container in the hands of an idol-worshipping Gentile, v'hu sheyiya loiboi shnei simanim, so long as you have on your wine two signs. It's called in halachic literature a seal within a seal. Now, a seal within a seal needs to be not two regular layers of covering, but at least one irregular layer of covering, as we're going to see in a minute. Ketzat. What does this look like? Sasam hachavis b'kli she'enei muhudak. If you covered your barrel of wine with a cover that's not tightly fitted, kederech shasais min kol adam, which is the ordinary type of cover that everybody does. B'tach b'tit, and then you layer that with clay. You put a level of sealant over the cover. The entire cover with the clay only classifies as one cover, one seal, because that's the normal way of covering it. If the cover that you put on was tightly fitted, and then you added a layer of clay, now you have two seals, because you've done one tightly fitted, which would classify for regular, ordinary people, and then you added an additional seal. Similarly, if you're dealing with not a barrel, but a wine skin, if you simply tied the opening of the wineskin closed, that is a chaysam echad. That's one seal. If you turn the mouth of the wineskin inward, and then tied a knot upon it, that's a double seal. Same thing with any different type of change that you would make, different to what ordinary people would do. That change qualifies as one seal, and then the additional layer of clay, or not, chaysam sheni will classify as the second seal. Today's bottles of wine, if you look at it, this is actually not such a good one because it doesn't have a cork, but if you would bottle a bottle of wine with a cork and then cover a piece of paper or plastic over it, that's a seal within a seal. If, however, you didn't follow the rule, and you deposited a bottle of wine or a barrel of wine to a non-Jew with only one seal, it's forbidden to drink it, although it's permitted to derive benefit from it. We're not going to go all the way. It's a rabbinic safeguard, so we're not going to make it completely forbidden to have benefit from it. Provided that the non-Jew designated a corner for you to put your wine. If not, if you just put it anywhere in his house, we are worried that perhaps he did handle the wine. Halacha Yud Yayin Mevushal. Pasteurized wine. You can see this on this is a classic bottle of wine. They have a little letter there that says Mevushal. So that means that it's pasteurized. It's a different category of wine. It was into chapter 11 2 days ago that it doesn't even qualify to be handled by a non-Jew and become forbidden. The Hasheichar or beer. Or yayin she'ervayim dvarim acherim, or wine that was mixed in with other ingredients. Kagayin dvash v'shemen, like a honey or a sweetener or oil. Or vinegar or cheese or milk. Anything whose prohibition would be rabbinic. In other words, the rabbis were the ones that said that you shouldn't put it into the hands of a Gentile, and you did nevertheless. You deposited it in the hands of an idol-worshipping Gentile. In these cases, two seals are not required. Only by wine, which could be a biblical prohibition, there you have to have two seals. If it's to begin with only a rabbinic prohibition, you only require one seal. One seal is enough alone. But wine or meat or a cut of fish doesn't have a kosher sign on it. There's no scales and no skin. And you were to deposit them in the hands of an idol-worshipping Gentile, here you're going to require two seals, because otherwise we're worried that the non-Jew will exchange his own non-kosher stuff for your kosher stuff. It seems to me, anytime we said in the last 3 chapters, in the topic of wine, with regards to our Jewish wine, that it becomes forbidden to drink, but remains permitted to have benefit from it, because of some kind of touching that the non-Jew engaged with it. That's only that's only if the Gentile was actually an idolater. But if the question that arose on the wine was because of it was touched by a Gentile who's not necessarily an idolater, like an Arab, a Muslim, who touched our Jewish wine unintentionally, or he patted down some bubbling, fermenting wine, which yesterday we said doesn't qualify to make it biblically prohibited and only prohibits it to be drunk. But to have benefit is permitted. That Rambam says if in addition to that, the idolater who created the question wasn't actually an idolater, he was just a Gentile, then it's actually permitted to be drunk. The same thing would apply in all similar situations. Aval halacha yud beis, a little counterintuitive halacha coming now. Hamafkid yayin biyad ger toishav. However, if you deposit wine in the hands of a resident alien, this is a non-Jew who took upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, included in which is not serving idols. Or you sent wine with him for a long period of time, or you left your home, storehouse of wine, open in the courtyard of a non-Jew who is accepted the 7 Noahide laws, it's still forbidden to be drunk. Because any suspicion of exchanging or forging keys, it seems to me, by any idolater is equal in it. Even though this guy specifically said, I accept upon myself not to serve idols, since he comes from an idolatrous branch or family of Gentiles, we don't believe that he's going to for sure keep to his commitment. Since for this moment or this period of time, the wine was transferred into their possession, either way it becomes forbidden to be drunk. Fascinating law. So if you come from a Gentile branch that doesn't serve idols to begin with, like a Muslim family, an Arab family, doesn't forbid the wine to be drunk. But if you come from an idolatrous group of non-Jews, even if you yourself accepted the 7 Noahide laws, doesn't change the status. Halacha Yud Gimel Yesh Dvarim She'ein Bahem Isur Nisuch Klal. There are certain things, certain behavior, certain situations, which technically the prohibition of libation wine doesn't apply to them at all. Nevertheless, the sages forbade it to distance us from getting into problematic situations. They are the following. A non-Jew should not pour water into wine that a Jew is holding. When a Jew is holding a cup of wine, it's totally permitted. Non-Jews pouring only water to dilute the wine. Nevertheless, it's forbidden. Maybe that will lead to an opposite situation. The Jew will be holding water, the non-Jew will pour wine into the water, and of course if the non-Jew handles the wine, that's forbidden. So the sages said, even the other way is also forbidden. Nor should the Gentile be involved in transporting the grapes to a press, because he may end up actually pressing or touching the wine. Nor should he help a Jew at the time that he's emptying wine from one utensil, one container to another. Perhaps the Jew will leave the container in the hands of the Gentile, which for that moment will allow the wine to be coming by the force of the power of the Gentile, and that will forbid the entire wine. Since all these halachas are rabbinic safeguards, if the Gentile violated them, he helped along in the process of bringing the wine or pouring the containers, or he did dilute the wine with the water, or he brought the grapes, mutter, it's all allowed. After the fact, it's all permitted. So too says the Rambam Malacha Yudalid, mutter a non-Jew can smell a barrel of our kosher wine. It's also permitted, by the way, for a Jew to smell wine that became yayin nesach, libation wine. There's no problem, no prohibition. Smell isn't considered anything because it has no substance. And halacha, at least in this area, we're going to see later in the end of the 8th book of the Rambam, when it comes to consecrated objects, things that belong to hektish, sometimes smell could be somewhat relevant. But over here, smell has no substance at all. Halacha tezvav kvar bi'arnu, we've already explained. Shekol davar shehu asur bahana. Any matter, any food substance which is forbidden to have pleasure from it, im avaru machrei damav mutarin. If you transgress and you sell it anyways, the money you make is permitted. Chutz me'avodas kechavim u'mishamsheha v'tikrei v'shala v'yayin shenis nasechla. There's one exception to that: idols, accessories of idols, things sacrificed to idols, and wine that was poured as a libation to idols. That's our discussion here. And therefore, if you were to sell such wine, the whole money would also be prohibited. The sages added to that, they were also stringent when it comes to regular Gentile wine, even if we're not aware that it definitely was used in idolatrous practice. Still, the sages were stringent, to make the wine forbidden, to make the money made off this wine forbidden, like the money made from any wine that was actually poured as a libation to idol worship. Therefore, if a Gentile were to hire a Jew to work with his wine, any money he makes is forbidden to have benefit from. So too, If a person rents a donkey to transport wine, or he hired a boat to bring wine, any money made from that is forbidden. And we're talking about a case if it's a problematic wine, yain nesach. If he was paid actual money, you bring him to the Dead Sea, destroy them there. If they paid him with clothing or utensils or produce, burn them, and even bury the ash, so you don't have any pleasure from the ash as well. If you as a Jew hired out your donkey to an idol-worshipping Gentile to ride on, primarily for his benefit, and he happened to put on also a barrel of wine, forbidden Gentile wine, the money you make from this trip is permitted. If a Gentile hires a Jew to break forbidden wine, to break wine that was used for libations for sacrifices, break the jugs of wine, of course, the money you make is permitted. You should get a blessing, because you're helping lessen ridiculousness, foolishness in the world. A person hires a worker and tells him, I want you to transport these 100 barrels of beer for 100 coins. And it turns out that one of the barrels was actually wine, non-kosher wine. The entire payment that you get for the entire work is forbidden because he never directly attached payment for each individual barrel. He said all the barrels for all the money. Since one of the barrels was forbidden, the whole payment becomes forbidden. But if he tells him, transport all these 100 barrels, 1 barrel per coin, and you transported them, and among them were barrels of wine, the payment that was meant to be for the barrels of wine are forbidden indeed to have benefit from, but the payment for the other barrels are permitted. Jewish artisans, they did work of some sort, and the non-Jew sends them a barrel of wine for payment. The Jew can tell the non-Jew, listen, we can't take this wine. Give us the worth of the money instead. It's not considered as if the Jew is bartering, as if he's exchanging the forbidden wine for money. He hasn't even received the wine yet. Once the wine enters their domain, they cannot ask for money replacement. A Jew was a creditor to an idol-worship Gentile for a mana, for 100 zuz, 100 coins. So the Jew is the creditor, the non-Jew owes the money. Goes the Gentile, sells off some of his idols, or some of his yayin nesach, some of his libation wine, and he brings the money that he makes to pay back the loan. It's permitted. He didn't ask the Jew's permission. He did whatever he wanted, and he brings the money as is. But if the Gentile tells the Jewish creditor, he says, listen, before he sells, he says, Hamten li, wait for me, don't demand the loan yet. Let me go sell my idols, or let me go sell my libation wine that I have, and I'm going to bring you the money. Even though it's not actual libation wine, it's just regular Gentile wine, and he sells it and brings in the money, it's forbidden. Once the Jew finds out that the guy is hoping, he's planning to sell the idols to make money off of it, now the Jew is going to want the idols or the wine to survive, to last, so they can be used to pay back his debt. That's like the Jew, in a sense, owning the idols. And then he wants to get the money from it, that's forbidden. Similarly, if you have a convert and a Gentile who were partners, and they're splitting up whatever, their possessions, their property, their profit. The convert cannot tell the Gentile, listen, you take the idols, I'll take the cash. You take the wine, I'll take the produce. Because in this case, you're attaching significance to the forbidden substances. You want them to exist, so you can take money opposite them. So in a way, you want the idols to be there, and you're getting exchange for them. Forbidden. But if a convert and a Gentile are dividing an estate left to them by their father who was a Gentile, in that case the convert can tell his brother, the Gentile, he can tell him, you take the idols, I'll take the money, you take the wine, I'll take the oil. The sages were lenient in the inheritance of a convert, so he shouldn't go back to his misconduct. If he sees that it's going to be too complicated to divide the estate, he may say, you know what, forget the whole thing, I'm going back to being a Gentile. But if they enter the domain of the convert for a second, he owns actively the forbidden idols or wine, the whole split cannot be done. He has to simply discard, get rid of all forbidden substances. A Jew sells his wine to a non-Jew. Pasak ad shalei madad loi. If they made up the price before he measured it out into the non-Jews' vessels, dam of mutardim, any money that he pays them is permitted. Shamisha pasak samcha daitai, because the moment they set the price, that's the moment that he realized that he's getting the money. Umisha mashach kana, the moment the non-Jew takes the wine, is the moment it becomes in his possession. The yayin nesach and nasa yigabay, but it doesn't become actual forbidden wine till he starts touching it and handling it. Nimsa b'shas mechira hayamuter, which means during the moment of transaction it was permitted substance, and the non-Jew is paying him for permitted substance. But if he measured out the wine into his utensils before he decided the price, any money that he's going to get is going to be forbidden. Because even though, since there was no price set, even though the non-Jew pulled, Mashicha in Jewish law is considered an active acquisition, even for non-Jews. Even though he pulled the wine into his possession and thereby decided in his mind, I'm paying for it, the nimtza keshanaga, because even though the non-Jew pulled the wine into his possession, and Mashicha, pulling, in Jewish law, even for non-Jews, is considered to be an active acquisition, nevertheless, he never fixed his mind, he never decided for sure I'm going to buy it. Which means that when he starts handling the wine, since there's no price set, he hasn't yet decided in his mind to buy the wine. Merely by his touch, the wine becomes forbidden. And at this point, it's as if the Jew is making a transaction with Gentile wine, and of course, any money to be made from that is forbidden. When do we say this? If the Jew measured the wine into his own containers. But if the Jew measured out the wine into a utensil owned by the non-Jew, or a Jewish utensil held by the non-Jew, he must first take the money and then measure it out. If he measures without taking any money, even if there was a forward price set up, the money is forbidden. Because the moment it reaches the utensil, the vessel of the non-Jew, it'll become forbidden as if it's regular Gentile wine. So no money can be made off of that transaction. A person gives a coin to a non-Jewish store owner. And he tells his non-Jewish employee, you go, drink and eat whatever you want in the store, and I'll take care of the calculations, I'll pay the bill. Now you have to worry the non-Jewish employee is going to go to the non-Jewish store and drink wine there. Which would then be akin to the Jewish employer buying the non-Jew yayin nesech, libation wine, and feeding it to him, which is forbidden. In a similar case, with regard to the sabbatical year, would be forbidden. Sabbatical year's produce are all forbidden to be eaten. What would be the parallel case? You give a coin to a Jewish store owner who is an ignoramus, unfamiliar with the laws of agricultural produce. You tell your Jewish worker, go to the store, I'll pay the bill. The guy might end up feeding him sabbatical year produce, Shemitah produce. If the worker would eat food that was not tithed, it would be forbidden. That's another case where the same thing could apply. Untithed produce, if the store owner is an am ha'aretz, an ignoramus, he may feed him untithed produce. But if the wording that the guy used was not go and eat and I'll pay the bill, he said, Ichlu shasu b'dinar zeh, go eat and drink on this coin. Or he says, go eat and drink from the store owner and I'll pay him. Even though he put himself on lien, since his liability wasn't specifically related to the foods from which the employees are going to take, it's permitted. He need not worry that it's going to be a problem of the wine libations or sabbatical produce or untithed produce. There's no issues in this when it's worded in this way. If a king was giving out wine to his nation, the case as the Gemara explains it is that there was a king who had a royal vineyard and he would produce wine and sell it to get money for the royal expenses. the way he would make sure to sell the wine was he would force every single subject of his to come and pay a standard amount to buy some wine. Now the king is of course a Gentile. For a Jew to buy that wine would be totally forbidden. So, but you have to buy the wine. You're a subject in the king's court. What are you going to do? So the Rambam says the following. The king is giving out wine to his nation. He's taking money as he desires. He always says, every person in my kingdom has to buy $100 worth of wine. The Jew should not tell the Gentile, because of course the Jew cannot buy the wine on his own. He's going to send a Gentile to do it for him. The wording has to be very precise. You cannot tell an idol-worshipping Gentile, here, take $200 and go instead of me to the king's treasure house. So that the Gentile should go take the wine that was written down in the name of the Jew. And the idol-worshipping Gentile will give the money to the king. You can't do that, because in this case, the non-Jew is clearly your agent. But you could tell him, take $200 and get me out of the storehouse. Save me from going to the storehouse. You didn't say go instead of me. You said save me. He does what he got to do. He goes there, he finds your name, buys the wine on your behalf, and that's fine. He doesn't act clearly as your agent. If a Gentile touched the Jew's wine against his will, to forbid it, it's permitted to sell that wine, even though it's libation wine, it's permitted to sell that wine back to that Gentile, the one who forbade it, only him. Because since the Gentile wanted to damage him and forbid his wine purposely, it's treated as though the Gentile broke or burnt the wine, in which case is obligated to pay. So when the Gentile will pay him for the purchase of the wine, any money the Jew takes from this Gentile will be treated as money of damages, not money of the sale. And therefore you can sell it back to that Gentile. Of course, to any other Gentile would be forbidden.